Welcome to The Faithful Steward. This is a podcast all about sharing biblical wisdom and practical insights in order to help church leaders pursue and teach financial freedom as part of Christian discipleship. We believe this is a spiritual conversation, and this is a place where the church needs to lead the way in order to move our communities forward in how we steward God's resources. I'm your host, James Lenhoff, and I am so passionate about this conversation and helping leaders have the confidence to step into it. We believe that if we help people thrive financially and grow spiritually, it changes everything. And I am so excited to join you on this journey. This podcast is brought to you by Good Sense. If you'd like more information about what we're up to, you can go to our website at goodsensemovement.org. All right, let's get started with today's conversation. Today we're going to finish up our series on journeying through stewardship across different life stages. And we left off in the last podcast in that transition into that early career stage. And one of the things I just want to catch us up on and start from is the incredible importance of establishing really intentional boundaries, really intentional disciplines in that stage. Because if we start in that early career stage to think of ourselves as faithful stewards, then the discipline and the tracking and the organizing of God's resources becomes so much easier to maintain, because they will only get more complicated over time. And so as we think about that early career stage, one of the most important things I want us to be thinking about is this is the stage where we want to be thinking of ourselves as diligent earners. How do we approach our work and think of our job as an opportunity for us to engage and give away the valuable skill sets and talents and effort that God has given us? How do we honor Him with our work and become really diligent earners? And in my mind, one of the key transitions for a diligent earner is to recognize that we are getting paid because we have exchanged value, not because we've exchanged time. I think a lot of times in that early career stage, we'll see people think, hey, we're just punching the clock. But if we start in that position with this awareness that we're really getting paid for the value that we bring, then the diligence in our earning is really focused on us offering as much value as we can, showing up and being as intentional as possible, showing up with energy and enthusiasm, and being really, really valuable on the team in the position that we play. If we establish that kind of thought around our work early, then pretty quickly that becomes just the way we show up. And now we're in a place where what we'll find is that when you bring that extra level of value and we're showing up with that kind of intensity and enthusiasm, we do tend to move forward quicker because we're more valuable. When we think of labor, of work as an exchange of value rather than an exchange of time, we will, by definition, probably be more valuable than the person who's thinking it's just an exchange of time. And so that's one of the most important things to set foundationally. And then from there, we start to build in all of the prudent spender disciplines. We're thinking of tracking, organizing, categorizing these resources that are flowing through our hands that are not ours. If we start from the get-go to be really intentional with organizing and tracking our expenses, to be thinking of the role of the faithful steward being able to tell the owner of those resources what we did with his resources and why, what decisions we made. If we're thinking that way, then we will frame our decisions in a way that is focused on honoring God and making sure that we're doing things responsibly with His resources, because we start right out of the gate with this awareness that this is not mine, it's His. One thing that I see happen a lot is that people will delay setting some of those savings foundations in place. They'll just kind of put that off until they get further in their career when they have extra money. Saving becomes this thing they'll do someday eventually. We want to actually build in the assumption that from day one, we're going to be building towards retirement. We're going to be saving into these vehicles, taking advantage of employer matches in 401ks and things like that. We want to be investing these resources into future obedience. We want to be putting ourselves in a position where accumulating for the future is costing as little as possible. And the only way that happens is if you start saving as soon as possible. And so this is a great time when you're used to living on little anyway, to keep yourself in some of those limited spending kind of habits and save the difference and start to get more aggressive over time with your saving rather than spending everything and hoping someday there'll be enough to save. When we delay the savings goals, when we push savings discipline off into the future, it means by definition, we're going to have to save a whole lot more to get to the same number because we've lost the benefit of compounding over time. This is a time early in a career where if you've brought any consumer debt, any credit card debt, you've got a car loan, you've got debt that you've accumulated to just get to this point, this is a great time to get really aggressive about eliminating those things and getting to a place where you are really strong in your cash flow and you're not serving a lot of debt. Debt service is a very difficult habit to break because we don't have to make very large payments. We can just keep kind of adding payments on top of payments and buying more stuff. And so if we really see debt as something we want to eliminate over time, rather than something that's not that big of a deal, it really changes our trajectory. It's amazing what that debt service does in terms of reducing your overall net worth over time, because money that would have otherwise been saved is instead going to pay down credit card debt, for example. And so in this stage, we really want to be coaching people to be thinking about these disciplines when they're easy to put in place. There's just not that many moving parts at this point. And so this is the time to get really rigid in focusing on being a diligent earner and a prudent spender. And one of those other aspects beyond saving is we really want to intentionally step into generosity. We want to be starting the habit and the discipline of giving. Whatever that looks like at this stage, be intentional about having that be part of your discipline and your structure, because if you start early with a tithe, then maintaining it is very, very easy. And so this is why I think the church needs to be really intentional about this conversation, because our young families, our young people, as they're graduating, are really getting swamped with a lot of mixed messages and a lot of self-focused spending and marketing that's telling them they deserve it and they can have it. And they're getting wrapped up in a lot of debt, and they're getting really confused on what it looks like to step into stewardship and be faithful in this work. And so this is really a space where the church needs to lead young people in this conversation to establish some of these boundaries and some of these structures to protect them from themselves. All right, so let's say you get started, you're in this career, and now we're at a stage where we're going to start a family. And for some, that is now being delayed. I'm seeing a lot of couples coming together and deciding to be married later in life than we used to. I know my wife and I got married when I was 22, pretty much right out of college. And so we didn't really have a time where we were doing this on our own. Both of us basically stepped into finances as a shared experience because we were pretty much in college kind of dealing with the confusion and the mess of navigating all that, but we had our family's support through that. And once we stepped into adulthood, we did it together. That's not really the case anymore. A lot of times there's this stage of adulthood that's happening before the marriage decision is coming. And I'm not arguing whether that's right or wrong. It's just where we are. And so what's happened is we see a lot of these individuals bringing an experience of individual stewardship or lack thereof into a marriage and having totally different understandings of money, totally different ideas, but they've already started some of those disciplines or maybe some of those bad habits when they were doing it on their own. And now the transition into oneness as a couple financially speaking, is really, really difficult, because either they're bringing mistakes with them, or they're bringing, these rigid ideas and these structures and this over saving that I see sometimes can happen. A lot of extra cash sitting around for some of these young families as they get started, because they're just afraid of the stock market, or they don't really know how to get involved in investing. And so they just stick it in savings accounts, but they've accumulated a lot, maybe in one case, and in the other case, they have some credit card debt, and they come together and have to navigate who they were before and who they're going to be now as they join together in marriage. And that can get really tricky. We're actually going to do a whole series starting next week on marriage and money. And so if this is you, if you're in this stage of kind of transitioning into starting a family and getting married, listen to that series. If you've been married for a while and money is just a constant struggle for you, it's a source of a lot of conflict, definitely check out that series. We're going to do several episodes on how to fix some of those common issues that we see in families when it comes to money. But the most important thing when we come together as a couple is to commit to doing money together, to being faithful stewards as one married couple, as one. We are united in our decision making. We are teaming up in accomplishing goals and overcoming obstacles. We are united in this idea that we want to be faithful with God's resources, and we're going to work together and see all of these things as an opportunity for us to be a team, rather than identifying these problems are your problems because you brought them with you, or those assets are my assets because I saved them before I met you. Those kinds of thoughts can really bring a lot of division and a lot of isolation and a lot of loneliness in marriages. And so first and foremost, we need to step into marriage as one and think of these financial resources as God's. And our job is to manage them and steward them well as a couple. At some point, you may decide together that it's time to start a family. And what I see a lot of times at this stage, once people start to see the vision for settling down and growing roots, their first thought is, well, we need to buy a house, right? That's just the natural, we're going to buy a house. One of the things that I see couples do a lot is they will rush into the acquisition of a home. They will think that their only option, their best use of all their resources, is to go and buy a house. And I'm not saying that buying a house is a bad idea. I'm just saying there's nothing magic about it, right? If you are renting because you're not 100% sure where your career is going, you haven't fully nailed down as we transition into raising kids, are we going to have one of us stay home? Are we both going to work? Are we going to homeschool? Are we going to send our kids to private school? Are we going to send our kids to public school? And what's that all going to mean? And where do we want to live? And there's so many variables at that stage that I think a lot of times if we rush to buy a home too quickly, we haven't actually answered any of those questions. And then the answers to those questions become almost forced on us just based on, well, we bought this house and it's in this area. And so because of that, we have to homeschool because the public schools here aren't very good or whatever. And we're stuck in these traps that if we just breathe for a second, give yourself a minute, think about some of these priorities as a couple, make some of these decisions. And it's okay if you rent for a while before you decide with some intentionality and some thoughtfulness where you actually want to be. Then we go and we decide to make a purchase. We do want to make sure that we have counted the cost, not just the mortgage or the property taxes or the insurance costs, but the cost of maintenance, the cost of upkeep, the cost of all these other experiences that you have as a homeowner. I see a lot of times people stretch way beyond where they can at this stage because they just want the higher level of lifestyle. They want, the space, or they want the certain area, and they don't think about all the other costs that come with it. The bank will tell you can afford the mortgage, but that's based on you never having fun and never going out and never spending money on anything and not giving any money to anything you care about. They are looking at the math and saying, yeah, technically you have enough income to afford it. And so people will ask the bank, how much mortgage can we afford? And then they'll shop for that house. And when you shop for that house, it's a really, really nice house. But when you factor in all these other things, the house you can afford might not be as nice, but the life that you will live in that house will be more peaceful, more content, and way less stressed out and overextended and worried. And that is worth a lot. Once we find that house, then I recommend that you buy the house on a 30-year mortgage, generally with a fixed rate. We want to be in a place where we can be really confident and we can plan on what these numbers are going to look like over the long term. We don't need to be in a huge hurry to pay that mortgage down. If the only thing you're saving into is by paying your mortgage off aggressively, you will miss a lot of other opportunities. And so we don't want to over prioritize eliminating efficient debt at the cost of other financial goals. That's a really common mistake for young families, and we need to be coaching them to balance all these things well, to be thinking of all the different priorities at once rather than overly focusing on one and by definition missing all the other ones that probably matter more. Paying off the mortgage on your first home is probably not going to mean a whole heck of a lot because you're probably not going to live there forever. And so we don't need to get as aggressive on that. Instead, if we build up other resources that allow us then to be ready to make the payment on the next house, to put a big down payment and move in the direction that we want to go rather than being stuck in this house that is the only asset we really have. As you think about raising a family then, one of the things I think we need to be encouraging the families that we lead is to be thoughtful about modeling intentional, faithful stewardship to their children. I think one of the biggest gifts that you can give to your kids is awareness of what your life costs, an invitation into some of your struggles, some of your difficult decisions, some of your trade-offs. In order for us to take this vacation, that means we can't do this other thing. In order for you to go to this school, that means I have to do this. There's these trade-offs that we need to invite them into, not to make them feel guilty or worried or any other negative emotion. I don't want to put that on them, but I do want them to know this is how the world works. And this is what it looks like to walk in faithful stewardship with all of these trade-offs in balance. I think a lot of times kids learn that there's trade-offs in life way too late because we protect them from that. We don't let them in on our trade-offs and they assume we don't have to make any. We just get to have everything we want. And that's not true. And so the sooner we can give them access to that truth, that there are consequences to our decisions, there are trade-offs in our decisions, and these are some of the ones we've had to make as a family, the sooner they start to grow in their own faithful stewardship. And the easier it is for them to make the transition into that first stage where we started our conversation today. Setting those disciplines up becomes easy because they learn them from a very young age. And so that means two things. One, you need to be actually modeling it. You need to be doing it yourself. That is a really hard hill to climb. If you've not been there yet, you've got to put these foundational disciplines in place so that you can show them to your kids. But secondly, it also means you need to let them in. You need to have conversations intentionally. You need to be talking about what you're doing and why. We need to be having some of those intentional conversations that let them in, even if it means we're showing them mistakes that we've made, decisions that we're not proud of, things we wish we'd done differently. Sometimes that's the best stuff that you can share with your kids because it humanizes you, it makes you real, and it gives them the ability to learn from your mistakes while you learn from your mistakes too. Let's maximize the benefit of the mistakes we make by not just learning it ourselves, but helping our kids learn from them as well. As you get to that mid-career stage, one of the things I want to just call out that can be a pretty common mistake is that people in this stage and a little bit before this stage, when their kids are getting closer and closer to college, they will overfund and over-prioritize college funding at the expense of their own retirement fund, at the expense of maxing out their 401k and saving into their Roth IRAs and building up resources for their own future obedience and their own future needs. they are way over focused on making sure their kid gets to go to college for free. Now, I'm all for funding college. I think it's great. It's a wonderful gift you can give your kids. But if you sat your kids down and you said, hey, you get to go to college for free, got great news. We got all the money for you. You're going to be able to go to college. But the moment you graduate, your mom and I are moving into your basement because we don't have anything for ourselves. Or the other option is we're going to be okay. We're going to take care of making sure our future is secured. We've saved for ourselves. And as a result, you're going to have to get some student loans for a few years. They would pick the second option if you gave them the choice. And so we don't want to over prioritize college savings at the expense of all of our individual priorities. We need to be responsible and faithful in our stewardship for our own future rather than sacrificing all of that just to pay for our kids to go to school. A lot of times in our diligent earning, as we hit that mid-career stage, we become relentless earners. We become over earners. We're so focused on just making as much money as we can and saving as much of it as we can that we don't actually look up for a second and remember where we're heading and what we're actually trying to accomplish, both in the present and in the future. We just end up sacrificing so much of our present. We can also a lot of times lose sight of connection and relationship with our family. And so we want to really be thoughtful here about how to balance today and tomorrow, how to think about how to be present and connected and in deep relationship with our families now, and also how to be preparing for our future so that those things work in tandem. Don't over accumulate in this stage and do that at the expense of staying present and connected to the people that you care about in that mid-career stage. That's where it tends to break apart. And then finally, as you transition into retirement, that later life stewardship, in my mind, this is one of the most precious and beautiful seasons that God gives us. And unfortunately, I see people in this season tend to check out. They see retirement as just this opportunity to be leisurely and to not really do anything or exert any effort or involve themselves in things. They just kind of disappear into fun. And I think the wisdom and the life experience that these families have to offer to other families is a gift that is supposed to be given. We are supposed to be investing in each other. And one of the things that I see in this later life stage is that people either feel like they don't have anything to offer, or they feel like they shouldn't have to invest in other people because they already did all of that. But what I want to encourage us to be thinking about as faithful stewards beyond just financial resources is how are you stewarding your time and your skill set and that gift of your experience? This is the season where you should be investing that into others because you don't have to do it for a paycheck. And so as you look at your community that you might be leading, are there families that are in this stage that are pulling away, that are becoming more distant, that aren't engaged in small group communities, aren't engaged in connection with families that are younger than them? How can you invite them back into a vision that looks like investing and giving what they've gained away to people who need it? A lot of times families at this stage will find that they have overaccumulated. They have more than they need. They may not know that. They're always going to assume, I don't have enough. There's always the fear, I'm going to run out. It's going to go to zero. The stock market's going to collapse. I'm not going to have enough. And so they can tend to be very self-preservation minded. And what we need to do as leadership is help to awaken them to a vision of legacy and impact, that these individuals can make a difference by investing their lives in others, by investing their resources in ways that really will change the lives of others. When we call them to something that is inspiring, that wakes them up to all of the opportunities to direct generosity into things they care about, that makes their heart come alive, That is such a beautiful invitation. What I want us to be thinking about with these families, and if you're in this stage, is to open up to the story that's bigger than yourself. Recognize that you are connected to the King of the universe who has more than enough. This is not a resource problem. This is really just a question of obedience. How do I use this in obedience rather than how do I use it in self-indulgence? And that is a really complicated conversation to have, but I think it is a really valuable one because those families continue to get further and further away. They kind of fade in the community, and the community needs them. The community needs what they have to offer in every way. And so we want to invite them in and engage them because that is what the kingdom of God looks like. Well, thank you so much for listening to the Faithful Steward podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes for links and other information that we mentioned in today's episode. Also, be sure to check out our website at goodsensemovement.org to get all the resources we offer churches to help equip them in teaching financial stewardship to their community. If you have any questions or any topics you want to make sure we cover on our show, you can email me at jameslenhoff@goodsensemovement.org. I'd love to hear from you. I hope you all have a great week. We'll talk to you next week.